And now for the last module in our computer hardware section. Today we're going to talk about the GPU and hardware and software analysis. This is a pretty short presentation to make up for the last one, which was a little bit lengthier than we'd like. So we're going to start off by talking about the final component of our internal hardware components, which is our GPU, or graphics card, also known as the graphics processing unit. Now, on a test or whatnot, I might ask you questions such as, give me the exact name for a CPU. You're going to write central processing unit. Give me the exact name for HDD. You're going to write hard disk drive. This is the only one where there's a little leeway because there's a lot of accepted terms for these. So when I say, give me the exact name for GPU, I will accept graphics card. I will accept graphics processing unit, things like that. But don't say graphics unit. It's got to be one of the two accepted ones. So in terms of our human body alias, the graphics card is kind of like our visual cortex. It's what interprets visual information. It's still binary data, ones and zeros, but they're ones and zeros that specifically have to do with visual data. So, interprets and converts and manipulates image data for display on the monitor. So it could be a whole bunch of little effects, and eventually the end result is it says color the first pixel this color, color the second pixel that color the third pixel that color, and so on and so forth. All right? So how does it actually work? Similar to a CPU, it manipulates binary data, but as I said, this is data that's specific just to images. Now, even videos are really just images, just a bunch of still images that go in sequence to give you the illusion of movement. So this is another one that requires super duper speed. And what I mean by that is every bit of data that's going through the motherboard from the graphics unit is going somewhere else, typically to the CPU, or it's going to the monitor or something like that. It's going somewhere and it's got to get there as fast as possible. The faster it gets there, the more frames your game can show per second. Now, a lot of people, that kind of golden standard is at 60 frames per second, unless you're a PC gamer. And in PC gamers, you're just looking for the fastest frame rate you can possibly get. Maybe 144 or whatever it is. So that's it for all of the components. But why is this so important? Who cares? It's not like you're going to go build your own computer. Maybe you are. Or maybe you're just going to shop around, and now that you're informed, you know how to make an educated choice about what you actually should buy. Now let's think about this. Why is this so important? Because nearly every household in North America owns at least one computer. Now, it might be a desktop, it might be a tablet, it might be something like that, right? Not only does every household in North America have at least one computer, they also have a budget, which means they have a limited amount of money to work on in a given time period. So after everybody in the house is done working, they have X amount of dollars to spend on bills and food and things like that, and they have Y left over for luxury items or savings and things like that. So imagine you're going off to school and you need a new computer for school. And maybe you make a deal with mom or dad or whoever takes care of you, and they say, all right, well, you've put away this much money and we're going to match that or whatever. And let's say you have $1,000 to work with. Say, go buy a new computer for $1,000. Now, the key here is that you have $1,000 and you need to buy a computer. Does that mean that you should spend $1,000? No, it really doesn't. Because if you can get what you need for $600, that leaves you $400 that you can put towards other expenses, whether that's food, so you don't have to eat bologna and craft dinner every day, or whether that is books for your classes or supplies or rent or whatever it is. That's $400 that can be used for another purpose. So just because you have a budget of a certain amount does not mean that you need to consume that whole budget. And the other part of this is the idea of buying what you need versus buying what you want. And there's a big difference there. I would love to have a brand new NVIDIA 3080 graphics card. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to spend $1,000 on a graphics card because I don't actually need that. I want it. but I can get by on something far less and still get great quality results. So, as I said here, we all have at least one computer, we all have a budget, but it's up to you to ensure that the machine that you buy will be within that budget, yet still capable of handling all your needs. So depending on what you do, let's look at an example. Imagine you buying a computer used by someone who simply browses the internet and uses social networking. That's not a lot. It doesn't consume a lot. So it doesn't require nearly as powerful as a machine as a digital artist does. A digital artist is going to be crunching that CPU. It's going to be crunching that GPU. It's going to be crunching the RAM. Whereas somebody who's just surfing the internet can get away with something like a Chromebook. They don't need all this. They don't need all the horsepower. So remember, the goal is to spend as little of the budget as possible. Not to get the most machine for the given budget. It's to get the most machine that you need. You need, not want. So how do we do this? The best idea is to create a list of the things that you're going to use the computer for. Write down all the software, the programs that you need to actually handle those things. So if you're going to school, depending on what you're going to school for, maybe you're going to school to be a writer. I don't know. So that means that you're going to need to run Office. You may need to run a few other programs for authoring and bibliographies and things like that, citations, but nothing too major. So you're not going to need a beast of a machine. On the other hand, if you're going to school to be an architect, you're going to need a much stronger machine because you have to deal with all the imagery and all the processing that's involved in that kind of stuff. So the software is going to be pretty intensive. So as it says here, every piece of software has different hardware requirements. So for example, Windows has a certain amount of RAM that it requires and a certain CPU that it requires to run at a minimum. All right? Most games you play have the exact same thing. They require a certain processor, a certain graphics card, and a certain amount of RAM, and a certain amount of storage space before you can even think about installing it. All right? So it's up to you to figure out what software you need, and then look at its requirements, and then that will help you decide what you actually need for your computer. All right? But what if you don't know the precise software? What if you say, well, I just need image editing software? Well, then you start to think about a genre. All right? So looking up these genres, we can figure out what we need. So as mentioned, each piece of software has its own hard requirements. However, certain types of software are consistent in their needs. So all image editing software, all video editing software have certain requirements. So video editing software, for example, requires a very fast CPU, lots of RAM, and a powerful GPU. Why? Because it's dealing with a lot of image data, large files, and a lot of image data. So you need all those components. Web browsing software requires very low amounts of hardware. Why? Because it doesn't do that much. It loads a page and draws it on the screen, and the page doesn't usually move all that much. BitTorrent software, you don't really need a lot of CPU or RAM or GPU, but you may need a really large hard drive to store whatever it is that you're pirating. Don't pirate. Pirating's bad. Office software. It requires about a mid-level CPU and RAM, but not a lot of GPU or hard drive space because it's not that big of a program and there's not a lot of graphics involved. Not really much at all, but it does require some crunching. It does require some math involved in there. And the files that you're making can be pretty big in terms of primary storage space, because primary storage space is typically quite a bit smaller than your secondary storage space. So the best way to generalize is to find one piece of software in that needed genre and use it as a model for all the software in that category. All right, so if you know your need to edit images, then you're going to look at, say, well, you might look at Photoshop, you might look at like Corel Draw or GIMP or a few other things that are out there. There's a ton of different software that use this. So that's it. Now that you know now that you know all the components, now that you know how to discern what is important in terms of what you're purchasing based on the software that you're going to be using, now you can actually make educated choices. So your follow-up task to this, which is going to be listed on the website, is to look into these types of things and look into possibly different components of different hardware that is new on the market, and or looking in and searching for a given computer based on a scenario. So I might say to you something like, find a computer for an accountant who uses their personal computer to do their work, but they also like to watch play a little bit of games and watch some Netflix. Using that information, you're going to have to go dig up, well, what kind of software do accountants use? So what are the requirements for that accounting software, whether that's Excel or whether that's QuickBooks or whatever it is, you're going to have to go look that up. You got to figure out what its requirements are, and then you got to find hardware that actually suits those needs. That may be your homework, depending on what I decide to assign you based on the Google Classroom at this point. That's it for this unit. We're going to move on to the next portion, which is going to be all about number systems.